This week's guest on Touch Bass and Soul is Korean-American violinist Danny Koo. He is a well-known chamber musician, a soloist and recitalist. However, this 27-year-old has not stopped there. He's been actively trying to help wider audiences better understand and appreciate classical music. And in turn, he has been winning over the hearts and minds of many people, young and old, through his television appearances, talks, and sometimes also his dance moves. I'm delighted to welcome Danny Koo to the show today. Hi, Danny. Thank you for coming in today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So, Danny, can you tell us about your beginnings with the violin and classical music? How did you start, and did you always love the violin from the start?
So I started when I was 6 years old. My uncle is actually a violist. And my parents had me when they were getting their doctoral in Chicago. And so we lived in this tiny studio apartment. And I remember my parents would go off to school. And when my uncle would come visit, he would practice in the morning. And I guess at some point I asked my mom, I want to play that. And so that's when I started playing the violin. And I only really decided to take this as a career this summer before my senior year of high school, which is very late for classical musicians. But at that point, I went to kind of this festival in Pennsylvania where there wasn't only classical music, but there was jazz, there was poetry, there was acting and dancing. And I think that was the first time when I really felt that the arts can have a tangible effect on society and really help the world. And I was hooked. And so I've been running ever since.
So you didn't take a very traditional route then?
No, not at all.
Classical music.
No.
I mean, but do you always loved it then? You always loved playing it, I'm guessing, and it became a passion for you?
Yeah, you know what? I think classical music has always had a special place for me. And I think it was just a matter of becoming a violinist and taking that as a career kind of felt different. But as I said before, I think it just kind of came down to the fact that as a violinist, I feel like at times I can be a doctor, at times I can be someone's therapist, at times I can be someone's family member. You know, you can do so many things with this art form. And so, yeah.
And then where did this route take you? Because you make the leap. It's still a significant step going from just playing it and choosing to have classical music as your career. Was it natural? Was it difficult?
I think it was a little bit difficult. My parents were never for it. I think only recently after, I started getting a lot of concerts and stuff that they became really supportive of it. But my parents have also loved classical music. I think that was really helpful from the beginning. But yeah, it was definitely a big learning curve. It's kind of like what actors say. First you say yes and then figure out how to do it later. It's kind of something like that.
So you start your career and you become an accomplished soloist, chamber musician. But then when you start being... when did you start becoming an advocate for classical music? I mean, you've had various talks on the power of classical music, including a couple of TED Talks. You've collaborated with children's shows as well, introducing young kids to classical music. How did that come about? I mean, were you perhaps frustrated with people not understanding classical music?
That's a really good question. So I guess that journey kind of started for me when I first started working in Korea, performing in Korea, which was about 3 years ago. And I came 3 years ago to play some concerts. And then the following year, they needed someone to give lectures at this random place. And so they were like, hi, how about if Danny tries it? And so I tried it and I loved it. And I found that actually talking about the music and giving people not necessarily what to think, but it's just kind of guidelines of what to listen for maybe, or because classical music, there are no lyrics and there isn't a story. People can write their own lyrics, write their own story. And so I think at that point I was like, I really want to kind of bridge the gap between this art form that I really love and the general public. And I felt like, especially in Korea, I kind of see that as kind of my role, is being that bridge. And so that one thing led to another, that led to giving more and more lectures, talk concerts, and then which led to TED Talks in Boston, and which eventually led to Ping Pong.
Right. We'll get on to Ping Pong in just a second. But do you think there is a big gap of people understanding what classical music is? Do they find it difficult, do you think, still?
Yes, I do believe that there is definitely a stigma that comes along with classical music. I think for many people, I think if you say, classical music, I think immediately they become a little stiff. And they're like, I don't know if that's for me, especially with society today, and especially with the younger generation today. I think there is becoming an increasingly wider and wider gap between those two.
Okay, so let's talk about Ping Pong now.
Let's do it.
I mean, this is, for many of our listeners, I'm sure they'll know, this is the company that brought us the viral and addictive Baby Shark song. You know, everyone knows it. Do 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 do.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm sure most have heard of that.
Yeah, party time.
So you have made appearances on the show, and you're also doing live performances for children with them all over the nation. How did this collaboration come about?
So I'm not really sure either, but I think so. They approached. So the great thing about Ping Pong is it's already like the Sesame Street of Korea, but they also create educational materials, and through their nursery rhymes and through everything, they want to teach something, right? And so I think they wanted to collaborate with classical music and teach classical music, and they were thinking, oh, maybe Danny could be a good host for that, and so we started off by filming. So every single time I come to Korea, I film a couple videos in Korean and English for their TV channel and YouTube channel, talking about classical music and kind of making it a little bit easier for kids to understand. Because actually, even Baby Shark, the da-dum, 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 that's from Dvorak 9. And so, like most nursery rhymes that they use all have the foundation of classical music. And so so kids are already listening and singing these songs, but then it's like, hey, that's actually classical music. It's not as difficult as you think. And then so these Ping Pong concerts that we just started doing this past May, that's completely new because Ping Pong as a company, they've had musicals, and they still have musicals, but they've never done a classical music show.
Right.
And
just for our audience to know, the Ping Pong musicals here in Korea are huge.
They're huge.
Yeah,
they're
they
always
sell
sold
out.
out.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And so this idea was not to do it in a musical theater, but to bring kids to real classical music halls, like the ones we're going to have next week on the 27th in Seoul Arts Center. This is a hall that fits maybe more than like 2,000 people, and it's recognized by the whole world as an incredible classical music hall. And yet we're going to bring people of all ages, and it's really exciting. It's really exciting.
How difficult is that process of creating this show for children? I mean, how does it go about? Is it a lot of your input, or does Ping Pong, the company, tell you a lot of what you should do, how what works?
So I think it was a collaboration between my management, Criteria, and Smart Study, which is that company. And what was really cool about this project is I did have, I was able to put in my input, which was really exciting, and logistically, the actual rehearsal process, that was so intense, man. Like, because so I'm used to just rehearsing with others. Maybe a quartet rehearsal will last maybe 4 hours. But this, we're acting, we're dancing, we're sweating. This was from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., And so it was definitely a stretch for me at first, but it's been really fun, and I feel like I've been learning a lot. So.
What has people's response been to your collaboration with Ping Pong? Have people come up to you, or perhaps kids come up to you and told you about what they've seen and how they've responded to the videos?
Yeah, I mean, I've had so far, I'm really thankful, really good positive responses, and I do feel very strongly about musical education, and I do feel that there is a certain healing, and there is something so special about classical music that I do want to share. And going to your question from before about there being a stigma about classical music, I believe that stigmas are formed as a child grows up, right? Through the environment or whatever. But we are kind of bringing the classical music to the kids before anything is able to be formed. Right, and so we're kind of getting the upper hand and being like, hey, this isn't classical music. This is just music. What is classical? It's just music. And so. So
you mentioned that there's this performance coming up, Ping Pong Classic Land. Can you tell us a bit briefly about it?
Yes. So that is on July 27th at the Seoul Arts Center. There are 2 concerts that day, and it's pretty much a classical musical, is what we say. So. I'm dancing, I'm acting. I'm the classical music guide. There's a baritone, there's a soprano, there's the penguin chorus, and there is, of course, Baby Shark and Ping Pong.
Of course, you
Plus,
can't have it without
there's
them.
a full orchestra.
Oh wow,
which is very cool. And so, it's a big challenge, but it's really exciting. And I remember in May we had our concert in Lotte Concert Hall, and just a couple months before I had played a Bach concerto in the hall, which is, if you think of the most stereotypical classical music concert, it's Bach and a concerto, right? And a couple months later, here I am, I'm singing Baby Shark on stage, And I remember in the rehearsal, I was like, oh my gosh, I did not think I would be doing this. You know what I mean? But it's really touching because when you're doing this, you see all these little kids like trying to do it, and you see their parents next to them like trying to like teach it to them. And it's just so touching. It's really awesome. It's really fun.
Well, it certainly sounds like there will be a fun and great show. What are your plans for the future then, though? Are you going to carry on with these sorts of collaboration, spreading the love of classical music, or do you have plans to go back to perhaps a more traditional classic music scene?
I think I'll just keep going along the path I'm on now and just keep doing everything. I think my foundation and my core will always be classical music. But I feel like it's important to do everything and kind of bring it to a wider audience.
And will we be able to see perhaps non-children's performance in Korea with you?
Yes. So I don't know if I can say these concerts yet because I don't think they're public yet. But yes, for sure. I possibly be soloing with an orchestra in December, with 2 orchestras in December, and then hopefully a recital tour very soon. And so. Yeah, so you guys can check me out then. Woo!
And finally, for our viewers on our social media fields, will be able to see that you've brought your violin in today. With
Yes.
you, right? And so you'll be doing a quick recital for us after this interview. Can you tell us about what you'll be playing and why?
Sure. So my name is Danny, and so it's only fitting that I play a piece called Danny Boy. And Danny Boy is almost like kind of an Irish person's anthem. It's not quite their anthem, but it's almost like that. It's, oh, Danny Boy, the lights are gone. And that song is about a mom who her son has to go to the army. And it's about her. It's almost that feeling of you see in a lot of Korean dramas. You love them so much, but you have to see them go. And it's that type of feeling. And I recently had a single come out in December, and the single title was Danny Boy. And so it's kind of just also become my anthem as well.
We'll be playing part of that performance at the end of the show, and the full video will be going on all our online social media feeds. So please do check it out for everyone who's listening. It's been wonderful to have you on the show today, Danny. We've been speaking to the violinist and classical music advocate, Danny Koo. Thank you for coming in, and hope we can speak to you again soon.
Thank you.